Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritta Naram Chaiva. All assembled devotees, please accept my humble obeisances and beg the blessings of all assembled devotees so that we may have a nice discussion today. This most glorious Srimad Bhagavatam, the ripened fruit of all Vedic knowledge. So today I've been asked to speak on Canto 4, Chapter 24, verse number 41. And we're all particularly fortunate today, sacrificing even an hour of sleep to be here today. So the author is chanting the song sung by Lord Shiva. Pravrataya nivritaya pitri devaya karmane namo adharma vipakaya mrittave dukkadaya cha. Pravrataya, inclination. Nivritaya, disinclination. Pitra devaya, unto the master of Pitraloka. Karmane, unto the resultant action of fruit. Disinclination and the resultant activities. You are the cause of miserable conditions of life caused by irreligion, and therefore you are death. I offer you my respectful obeisances. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead causes the asuras to forget him and the devotees to remember him. One's disinclinations are due to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. According to Bhagavad Gita 16:7, pravritim cha nivritim cha jana navidur asura. The asuras do not know which way one should be inclined to act and which way one should not be inclined to act. Although the asuras oppose devotional service, it is to be understood that they are inclined that way due to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because the asuras do not like to engage in the Lord's devotional service, the Lord within gives them the intelligence to forget. Ordinary karmis desire promotion to Pitraloka, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9:25, Yanti Deva Vrita Devan Pitra Yanti Pitruvataha. Those who worship the demigods will take birth amongst the demigods, and those who worship the ancestors go to the ancestors. In this verse, the word dukkadaya is very significant. For those who are non-devotees are perpetually put into suras, or non-devotees are put into such miserable condition. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamstra Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamstra Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Rindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Turubhyascha Krupa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschasya Deshatarine Hai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So I'll read the verse again. The verse again is Canto 4, chapter 24, verse number 41. My dear Lord, you are the... Just again for context of where we are in this fourth canto, in this 24th chapter, we are seeing the wonderful pastime, and Lord Shiva is very wonderfully glorifying the Supreme Lord. So this verse is a continuation. It's explained earlier that with folded hands, they are very attentively hearing. And so that we can pray that we can also continue to hear these verses very, very nicely. So this verse is very interesting because up until the very last line, I offer you my respectful obeisances. We may wonder, is this a prayer? It's saying you are the cause of miserable conditions of life caused by irreligion. Therefore, you are death. And so this verse certainly piques our interest because it begs the question, Lord Shiva is saying that Krishna, you are the cause of miserable conditions of life. So we'll actually unpack this verse in the purport in detail to understand who is the initial cause, who is the ultimate cause of all of this suffering, this dukkha daya, as Srila Prabhupada comments on at the end of this purport, this perpetual suffering. But we know it is actually the mercy of the Lord who is responsible for our actions. Because here we're being told, seems in the verse that Krishna is the cause, and Srila Prabhupada guides us very nicely in this purport to help us understand how this is actually carried out. So we can discuss that. We can discuss how Krishna is the source of both inclinations and disinclinations to serve him or to forget him. So we can discuss that. And then we can understand or discuss a little bit about this concept of free will. In some ways, we consider this free will to be pesky, giving us trouble because we are not so mature in using this free will. So we'll discuss how this free will interacts with our ultimate being the cause of actions, but also what a devotee or how a devotee utilizes their free will very intelligently, recognizing their position. So we'll discuss those three things and maybe anything else that comes up during the discussion period of this class. So I would like to again beg the blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis so we can have a good discussion on these topics today. So as I mentioned, when we first read this verse, it may seem like Krishna is responsible for all of our nonsense. But we see in the last line, I offer my respectful obeisances. So there must be more to the story. And certainly Srila Prabhupada is guiding us. He makes a very important statement in the middle of the second paragraph. He says, because the Asuras do not like to engage in the Lord's devotional service, the Lord within gives them the intelligence to forget. So he clues us in here that ultimately, who is responsible for our actions? It is the free will of the person. So at first look here, it seems like the non-devotees are perpetually put into a cycle of birth and death, and maybe it can seem almost unfairly so. But actually, we'll see that the inclination and disinclinations, yes, they are inspired by the Supreme Lord, but it originates with our free will. So we're going to see that we are responsible, but at the same time, we're extraordinarily dependent on the Supreme Lord. And this dependence is actually quite extreme. Both understand their dependence, whereas the non-devotees, the Asuras, do not. But the fact remains the same, that we are fully dependent on this Lord. So we're going to see how here now. So Srila Prabhupada, often says that the world is full of Shudras, Mlechas. This virtually everyone is in the mode of passion and ignorance. And sometimes, when we hear this, we think, wow, is that really this case? So Krishna in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita the 6th verse, immediately prior to the verse that Srila Prabhupada has referenced here, he says that there are only two types of people. There are suras and asuras. There are the divine and the demoniac. And then he explains, and Srila Prabhupada explains in a purport, that it is a simple guide that one who follows the Vedic principles is a sura, and everybody else is an asura. This is what demarcates whether one is a divine person or a demon. There is no in between. So either you are certainly in the minority, at least during this age of Kali Yuga. In the prior yugas, they were certainly, it was flipped the other way. But today we can see this. So these demons that we speak about, they are not only the Rakshasas that we read about in Srimad Bhagavatam or here in our pastimes. But it is very practical and relatable to today in the environment. And it is not necessarily a derogatory term. It is a term to simply indicate whether one is following activities in accordance with the Vedic injunctions or not. And we know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whose glorious appearance we are going to be celebrating tomorrow, came to deliver all of us asura-like persons and inspire us to take to the following of the Vedic principles. So when we speak about the asuras, to those around us as well. So in the verse that Srila Prabhupada comments on the 16th verse of the 16th chapter, 7th verse of Bhagavad Gita, he says, those who are demoniac, they do not know what to do and what not to do. They are unclear of what is to be done, and they are unclear of what is not to be done. Right? And so, and Srila Prabhupada speaks that this knowing and not knowing, it comes from Krishna. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So why are the demons demons and the divine divine? Well, ultimately is based on our desires. We have the free will to choose what we want to do. But that free will, while it is there, our independence is still very, very tiny, very, very small. And this verse reminds us or speaks to the extraordinary limited independence we have. When we have this ability to just exercise or to express our free will. But even the process of forgetting Krishna is not in our own hands. The process to forget Krishna and to act in a demoniac way, we are dependent on Krishna to enable that, to allow it to happen. Without Krishna's allowing us to forget him, it would not happen. The disinclination that we hear in this verse, it comes from Krishna. But again, very importantly, it is based on our desires. So that forgetfulness is based on our initial desires. So Srila Prabhupada is saying here in the opening to the purport that the inclinations and disinclinations are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, in concluding the Bhagavad Gita, is giving a summary. And in the beginning of this 18th chapter, he explains the 5 constituents of action. He says there are 5 components to any activity that are performed in this material world. And the 5th of those constituents is the supersoul. And so, and he says, ultimately, it is under the guidance and direction of the supersoul. So, in Prabhupada comments in the purport that it is actually the supersoul that is the source of inspiration to act. So even we cannot become inspired to do something without the presence of the supersoul inspiring us to act. Right? So, we clamor and claim for this independence. But even the inspiration to do something, let alone actually performing an activity, we know the performance of activities requires the interactions of all the modes. But even the inspiration, which is more subtle, is dependent on Krishna, the supersoul, right? And so he is the source of these inclinations and disinclinations. Should I eat this unoffered foodstuff? Krishna would be the source of that inclination. Or I don't want to attend the temple today. That disinclination, it also is inspired by Krishna. So this then brings us to this question then, isn't Krishna responsible? He's inspiring us to act either piously or act foolishly. But again, Krishna is providing these inclinations and disinclinations based on our desires. And how does he know our desires? Well, the Supreme Lord is situated in our heart. Sarvasya chaham riddhi shanivisto. Riddhi. He is seated inclinations and disinclinations accordingly. So they are not forced upon us. They are in reciprocation to our desires, in an intricate way. Right? So Srila Prabhupada is quoting this very famous verse from the 15th chapter, this Sarvasya Chaham Riddhishane Vishto, Matashmitir Gyanam Apohanam Cha. So this is the first part of this verse. The second part of this verse speaks about how Krishna is the compiler of the Vedas. He is the knower of the Vedas. And indeed, he is the object or the item to be known from the Vedas. All right, the Vedas just eva Veda, Vedanta Krut, Veda eva Chaham. So, but we'll discuss the first part of this verse. And so this verse in the 15th chapter, it comes in a sequence of verses in which Krishna is establishing how the living entity is fully dependent on the Supreme Lord. And the conclusion of these few verses is that we should surrender to the Lord. So in the 12th and 13th verses of this 15th chapter, Krishna is speaking about how he is the splendor of the sun and of the moon, and how he becomes the moon. And we know that, without the sun, how we could live. We could not grow even one grain of rice or vegetables without the sunlight, or how we would have any warmth. All the electricity and power ultimately comes from the sun. So we are very dependent on the sun. And Krishna is saying he is that splendor of the sun. Even the moon is the source of all of the tastes of the vegetables. He enters the planets and keeps them in orbit. We can imagine what would happen if the planets moved just a few feet closer to the sun or a few feet further away. Our whole existence would be disrupted. So it is Krishna alone who is maintaining all of these different features that allow us to have some semblance of an existence in this material world. Even the digestion, he says, comes from me, he says. You can imagine, we may live in a wonderful mansion, and we may have the most amazing family and the most amazing, wealth and fame and reputation in society. But if we don't have our digestive ability, what would be the condition of our existence? So even the digestion, that is being maintained by Krishna. And actually, doctors and scientists, they'll say that the digestive enzymes that are found in the stomach are not found anywhere else in nature. So when Krishna says, I am that digestive fire, that is him. So these verses 12, 13, and 14 of this 15th chapter, they're showing that we are so dependent on Krishna. We cannot even digest a morsel of food without him. But then in this 15th verse, we see even a more subtle but more extensive dependence on the Supreme Lord. That him situated in our heart, we are dependent on him by this matash mitir gyanam apohanam cha. So according to Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he comments that Krishna is giving us knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. These three things Krishna is giving in order to allow us to enjoy the material world. Not only is he providing all of the facilities externally, keeping the moon and the sun and the planets in alignment, digesting the food, and of course, all the other features, but internally, he is sitting in our heart and giving this forgetfulness, remembrance, and knowledge to enjoy. So it is fully by the provisions of the Supreme Lord that we're able to do. So the immediate logical conclusion is that we should surrender to Krishna. But unfortunately, due to this free will, sometimes pesky, we have a choice to make. And that choice obviously is based on our knowledge. So the free will that we have combined with lack of knowledge leads to this very dangerous situation. Krishna will fuel our disinclinations to forget him, to not render service to him, to not surrender, if that is our desire. And so this free will becomes very powerful, but in the hands of the irresponsible, very dangerous. The asuras do not know what to do and what is not to be done. And that not knowing, it comes from Krishna. Right? So this free will in the hands of the ignorant leads to this very dangerous situation, this dukkha that they are perpetually put into this cycle of birth and death. It's like giving, the keys to a very fast car to a young child who doesn't know how to drive. That is a very dangerous combination. Fast car and a child who does not know how to drive. Similarly, this free will without knowledge is a very dangerous combination. And we see the result of that all around us, right? We see so much difficulty, and it is due to this combination of free will and lack of knowledge. So let us kind of explore these three concepts of forgetfulness, remembrance, and knowledge, and how they combine to actually allow us to enjoy in material sense enjoyment, and how to enjoy separate from Krishna, because it is only Krishna's facilities that allow us to even do that. So this forgetfulness, this apohanam, excuse me. Actually, Krishna allows us to forget in three different ways. The first is that he allows us to forget our past lives. If we remembered our past lives, we would be so confused and have no semblance of peace in this current life. If we remembered when we were the snake in the garden and the owner was chasing us with a shovel, and ultimately what he did with that shovel, what kind of peace we would have now. Or if we remembered, when we were a worm in the stool, or we were a fly who got zapped by the light, what kind of existence we have. So Krishna, out of his kindness and reciprocating with our desire to try to enjoy materially, he allows us to forget our past lives. The second thing he allows us to forget is he allows us to forget our past pains and sufferings. We forget what it was like to be suspended in a bag of fluids upside down for 9 months in the womb of our mother. There's actually consciousness, as we see in Srimad Bhagavatam in the 3rd canto. But Krishna allows us to forget that condition. Actually, in that condition, we are praying to the Supreme Birth. Please get me out. I am surrendered unto you. But as soon as we emerge from the womb, we immediately forget. Right? And I was recently asked in a class, why do we forget? Why does Krishna make us forget? Because it is our desire to forget. He is the source of our disinclinations. But that forgetfulness, it is based on our past lives. We forget our past difficulties. And finally, the third way is he helps us forget him. If we want to enjoy the material world, well, then we have to forget Krishna. If we remembering we are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, then our enjoyment of our sense desires becomes very complicated. There's a sense of guilt or a sense of, limitation. So Krishna, being very magnanimous, fulfills our desires according to our qualifications. But you want to enjoy separate from me? Okay, then you can completely forget me. And this is the role of Maya. Maya is this illusion, a very powerful illusion. And sometimes we lament, why Maya has to be there. Well, Maya is there only to fulfill our desires, because we want to enjoy separate from Krishna. But in reality, we can never be separate from Krishna. As I just explained, even the digestive enzymes, we are dependent on Krishna. Every breath we take, we are dependent on the Lord. So if the living entity wants to be, try to experience life separated from Krishna, then a very strong illusion has to be in place. You know, what an illusion does is it makes something that is not real seem real. That is the definition of an illusion. Something that is not real appears to be real. So this separation from Krishna, it is not real. We are not separated. But by the power of Maya, a very powerful illusion, we can seemingly experience the separation. But this forgetting of Krishna through the illusory influence of Maya, it is due to our desires. So while we may lament this situation, it is only our own doing. Okay? So that is forgetfulness. Now, remembrance. What does remembrance play into this role of enjoying the material world? Well, our acharyas comment that Krishna facilitates our ability to remember all of our past desires. These desires are stored in the mind, and the mind travels from body to body along with the intelligence and false ego and the spirit soul. So Krishna has facilitated this means for us to even remember all of our past desires. They are stored in this very powerful, database of the mind. So remembrance of our material sense desires also, they come from Krishna. There must be some impetus to work in the material world, and that we see again comes from the Supreme Lord. And finally, he gives us knowledge how to enjoy sense gratification. We sometimes wonder how somebody invented these crazy intoxicants to enjoy in that way. Then that knowledge of how to do so also comes from Krishna. So in this way, the Shmitir, Jnanam, and Apohanam, these three things, forgetfulness, remembrance, and knowledge, they all come from the Supreme Lord. And they help us try to enjoy the material world according, though, to our desires. And so what is the result? We see the result of this is this dukkadaya, this perpetual suffering, this endless suffering. It is a painful cycle of birth and death and taking all the reactions from our activities. When we act whimsically, one has to suffer the results of such work. And as we, proceed to this world, acting how we want, we are accumulating so many reactions. And by accumulating so many reactions, we then have to come back into another birth to receive those reactions. And while receiving those reactions in the next life, we create new ones. And so then we have to come back again to receive those new ones. And like this cycle continues. How long? Srila Prabhupada says in the end of this purport, the non-devotees are perpetually put into the cycle of birth and death. So this is a never-ending cycle of action and reaction. And all of this, again, is being facilitated by the Supreme Lord, being situated in our heart as Paramatma, fulfilling our desires to remember all our material sense desires, to forget our past pains and past lives, and to forget Krishna, and to inspire us with some knowledge of how to enjoy. So this is the very difficult situation. And all of this misery in the world, from the highest planet to the lowest, is due to our own actions. And if we look around us, it is so clear, right? How much misery is being created. Now we have this coronavirus, and great plans for vacations and cruises and different things are all being canceled. I was just supposed to go to a conference this week, and so much endeavor has been put on this conference. Several thousand people were attending and speakers, and this virus. So these are the reactions to so much activity that is happening, not in obedience to the laws of Krishna. So when we speak in this way about all this suffering and how there is no happiness in this world, there's very feast, we see 10% attendance in class and 100 attendance in the feast, right? That is the nature, because sometimes we don't want to hear this, but this is the truth. Though it may hurt, this is the reality. And so all of this originates, again, as we keep reiterating, it's very important. It originates with our free will. And sometimes I wish I didn't have this free will. Well, actually, that is not true. We want this independence, right? We see in the world around us how much blood has been shed for independence. Right? We want this free will. And actually, there cannot be real love of Krishna without this aspect of free will. So, yes, the free will combined with lack of knowledge leads to a very dangerous situation. So now brings us to, then what do aspiring devotees, how do they approach their free will? And this is very nice for us to understand, because we see Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he surrendered his free will to Krishna. So we as aspiring devotees, we have to recognize that in our immature state, this free will is dangerous. And recognizing and owning our immaturity of knowing how to use this free will, what does the devotee do? They surrender their free will to the hands of Krishna and Guru. They say, I cannot use this free will responsibly. So Krishna and Guru, you please guide me as you wish. And the devotee surrenders their free will, knowing that they have this inability to use it very wisely. And they have great faith in Krishna and Guru, that this knowledge is actually received. When this mood of surrender comes, when we surrender our free will to Krishna and Guru, then knowledge comes. And this knowledge teaches us what to do and what not to do. And at some point, then we may have some ability to utilize our free will. Right? So when we surrender it, the other side of this Shmitir Jnanam Upahanam Cha also comes. That Krishna will help us remember him. While he helped us remember all of our material desires, if we ask Krishna, please help me remember you, I have forgotten you due to my ignorance, then certainly Krishna will reciprocate with that desire as well. And he'll become the source of our remembrance of him. He'll help us, forget all of our material desires. Krishna, I'm so attached to my material desires. Help me, please forget all of these and help me, render service to you. Then certainly Krishna will become the source of forgetting our material desires. And the knowledge, right? The knowledge to understand I am part and parcel, that I have this minute independence, that I should surrender to you. Krishna, please help me obtain this knowledge. So just as Krishna is the source of the disinclinations and inclinations for the asuras, he is certainly the source of the disinclinations to the material world and the inclinations to spiritual life for the devotees. So there is both sides of the equation present, but it is up to us to desire. And so because we have, and at least the devotee understands that they're not responsible with their free will, they surrender to Guru. And we see this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu as Rupa Goswami is explaining the stages of bhakti. In the initial stages of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, the devotional service, because the natural impetus is not yet developed. The natural impetus comes after one matures in this Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti and comes to this Raganuga Bhakti. Right? So the devotee surrenders their own desires, their own free will, in order to happen this. And I was recently having a very nice discussion with a very nice devotee, and we were talking about this free will and the need to take instruction and follow. And the question was asked of me, this what is the role of discretion in our actions? Because we were speaking about how we should always ask what we should do. Already knowing how to use our free will, then we can take some discretion, maybe take some decisions. But in our developing state, the intelligent devotee surrenders that free will, recognizing the consequences of the irresponsible use of it. Right? But if we look, and I thought we could conclude with a little bit of discussion about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Shikshashtakam prayers. As we're celebrating Gaur Purnima tomorrow, there's a very nice link between these topics and these Shikshashtakam prayers, that we'll see that even the greatest of devotees, they surrender their free will to Krishna. So it is not necessarily, the point that this free will surrender happens in the premature stage or initial stages. Actually, the purest of pure devotees ultimately surrender all of their desires to the will of Krishna. And so in this Shikshashtakam prayers, we see these 8 wonderful verses. And in Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya Lila, and here Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is personally explaining each of these mantras and the prayers. It's a very beautiful chapter. I try to read it each time during every Gaur Purnima. So if anybody would like to, you can also read again Antya Lila chapter 20 of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so, this Shikshashtakam prayers, they progress from the first verse in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is explaining, the 7 different glorifications of the holy names. And then he explains in the second verse how, though there are no hard and fast rules, and though they are so potent, he is very unfortunate, Durdevam, that he has no attraction for the holy names. And then in the third verse, he, explains how one can actually chant the names constantly by being very humble and tolerant and respectful. This humble mood being the core principle of being able to chant. And then in the fourth verse, we see, the purity of desires, no material desires, even liberation, the only desire to be a servant. And the verses continue with this mood of humble prayer, and then these ecstatic symptoms in verse 6, and in 7, this intense attachment where separation from the holy names feels like 12 years or more. So these Shikshashtakam prayers kind of progress, from the initial understanding of the holy names to, this no attraction, to this, Kirtaniya Sadahari, and ultimately it brings us to this 8th verse. And this 8th verse of the Shikshashtakam prayers is so beautiful. So just read it again. Ashtisya va pararitam panashtamam adarshan marmatam karotuva yatha tata vedadato lampato mat prana santastu sa eva napadaha. So it says, let Krishna, I'm just reading from Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's a little bit different than our translation that we have in our daily recitation. But it says, let Krishna tightly embrace this maidservant who has fallen at his lotus feet, or let him trample me or break my heart by never being visible to me. He is a debauchee of all, after all, and can do whatever he likes, but he is still no one other than the worshipful Lord of my heart. So, and in the subsequent verses of this chapter, that was verse number 47, there is a very beautiful explanation. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is describing the mood of Srimati Radharani and how she has surrendered her entire free will to her beloved Krishna. And you can see that. So the point here is, even in the most mature state of devotion, there is certainly no greater devotee of the Supreme Lord than Srimati Radharani, that she surrenders her free will. So I wanted to read a few of those verses. I cannot read them all. Some of them are, beyond the ability to read. But if you'd like to, you can read them. They're very, very sweet. But again, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is reciting these verses, and he is speaking from the mood of Srimati Radharani in her love for Krishna. So she says, I am a maidservant at the lotus feet of Krishna. He is the embodiment of transcendental happiness and mellows. If he likes, he can tightly embrace me and make me feel oneness with him. Or by not giving me his audience, he may corrode my mind and body. Nevertheless, it is he who is my Lord of life. My dear friend, just hear the decision of my mind. Krishna is the Lord of my life in all conditions, whether he shows me affection or kills me by giving me unhappiness. So you can see this unconditional mood of love. It is not, oh, Krishna, if you are nice to me, then I'm nice. Sometimes Krishna gives up the company of other gopis and becomes controlled by mind, body, by me. Thus he manifests my good fortune and gives others distress by performing his loving affairs. But then she goes on to say, I do not mind my personal distress. I only wish for happiness of Krishna, for his happiness is the goal of my life. However, if he feels great happiness in giving me distress, that distress is the best of my happiness. Can there be any more greater surrender of free will? Again, she says, if he feels great happiness by giving me distress, that distress is the best of my happiness. Such an extraordinary mood that he says that she is showing here, and she goes on to comment about how even the rival gopis, if the rival gopis are giving Krishna pleasure, then Srimati Radharani will personally become the maidservant of those gopis. So even Srimati Radharani has surrendered her free will, her desire to be with Krishna, to serve him. If that doesn't give Krishna happiness, then she doesn't want that. So her only desire is the pleasing of the Supreme Personality of discussion today. This free will is there, but in the hands of the intelligent who knows what to do with this free will, the devotee surrenders that to Krishna and Guru, and thus Krishna takes control of the spiritual journey of the living entity and brings them to the highest platform of devotional service, where there is unlimited bliss and happiness. So we can pray to Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he may take our pesky free will in his hands, and we may have the intelligence to surrender to him and take control and bring us to the shelter of his lotus feet eternally, life after life, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu prays for in the 4th verse of the Shikshashtakam prayers. So with that, I'll conclude and take any questions. So, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda. So, any questions or comments or corrections or clarifications from today's discussion?
Thank you very so much for such an encouraging session, Prabhuji. Wonderful realizations on who is responsible for action and information discrimination and the importance of Shikshashtakam. So, very wonderful realizations, Prabhuji. Wonderful analysis. Koti Koti Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Dandavat Pranam.
If anybody has any questions, please go ahead. Hare Krishna. Hare Bo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji Dhamma Pranam, Mr. Sri Prabhupada. Very nice lecture, and also the last part was my favorite. The ones that the verses that you read, explaining the love of complete surrender to the Radharani. I believe it's canto, the last canto, sorry, Antalila, chapter 10 or something.
Yeah, Antya Leela, chapter 20. Those verses start from verse 47, but if you're so inspired, you can read the whole chapter. It is extraordinary, and I only read a few of the verses, but that explanation for verse 8 is quite long and extensive, and it is extraordinarily powerful and so sweet. So you can all read it. It's very nice. But again, Antya Leela, chapter 20.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, if nobody has any questions, Haribo. Anybody have any questions for Prabhuji? Okay, yeah. Prabhuji, thank you very so much once again for such a blissful, enlightening class today. We are always very grateful to you and we look forward for your association again and again in future, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Dhanavad Pranams.
If nobody have any questions, we can move on to our next session, Bhakti Mandal Parikrama.
Yes. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dhanavad Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj.
Dhanavad Pranam Mataji, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you Mataji. We can start with